Matlock made Andy Griffith America's favorite lawyer, and then a real man legally took his name to run for sheriff and Griffith sued him. 3 of the 8 people you remember from that Atlanta law office are now dead. One died at 66 quietly, at home. 1. Andy Griffith was 59 when that first Matlock movie aired in March of 1986, and the wrinkled seersucker suit was a disguise. Ben Matlock charged a fortune, ate hot dogs, dressed like a man who had never met a tailor, and played dumb right up until the second he stopped. He would ramble. Sometimes he would apologize to the judge. Then the trap closed, and the whole show ran on the audience knowing it was coming while the witness did not. 3 years earlier, Griffith could not stand up. Guillain-Barré syndrome left him paralyzed below the knees in 1983, and he spent roughly 7 months learning to walk again. Ben Matlock is the role that brought him back. He was born in June of 1926 in Mount Airy, North Carolina, the only child of Carl Lee and Geneva Griffith, and the family was poor enough that as an infant he slept in a dresser drawer. A local minister taught him to sing and to play the trombone. Griffith took a music degree, taught school in Goldsboro, then recorded a comic monologue about a country boy trying to make sense of a football game. Capitol Records bought it, and by 1954 it had climbed to number 9 on the charts. Broadway came next, and a Tony nomination. Then Elia Kazan cast him in A Face in the Crowd, where he played a drifter who turns into a monster the moment television hands him a microphone, and audiences at the time did not want it. Now set one fact against everything you think you know about him. Across the entire run of The Andy Griffith Show, he was never nominated for an Emmy. He was passed over every year, while Don Knotts collected award after award standing 3 feet away from him, and Frances Bayvier won one of her own. The town was named for him, and the prizes went to everybody else. What he did have was the paperwork. His manager, Richard Linka, had negotiated him majority ownership of that earlier series, widely reported as half of it, which is far rarer in television than a trophy. Every per-episode salary figure circulating for his Matlock years traces back to net worth websites, and they contradict each other by a factor of 10. The ownership is the real money story, and the ownership is documented. His private life was quieter and much sadder than the television version. He married Barbara Bray Edwards in 1949, and because they could not have children, they adopted 2 infants about a year apart, a son named Sam and a daughter named Dixie. That marriage ended in 1972, and in 1983 he married Cindy Knight, who stayed with him until the end. In January of 1996, Sam Griffith died at 38 of cirrhosis of the liver after years of alcohol and drug use. His father did not attend the funeral. Here is the part almost nobody knows. In November of 2006, a music store co-owner in Platteville, Wisconsin, named William Harold Fenrick, legally changed his name to Andrew Jackson Griffith and ran as an independent for sheriff of Grant County. He spent about $5,000 on the campaign, admitted the name was the publicity, and finished third. The actor sued him in federal court in Madison, claiming violations of trademark, copyright, and privacy law, and asked the judge to force the man back to his old name, publish disclaimers, apologize, and pay damages. Fenrick called the lawsuit absurd and un-American. The judge ruled that a name change made for a political campaign was protected speech, and Andy Griffith lost. 6 years later, on the 3rd of July, 2012, he died of a heart attack at his home on Roanoke Island in North Carolina at 86. Under arrangements, he had made himself there was no service, and he was in the ground within 5 hours. Ben Matlock never lost a case in 9 seasons. Andy Griffith walked into one real courtroom to stop a stranger from becoming a sheriff with his name, and walked out beaten. 2. The second name belongs to the man who did the legwork, and who was arrested in the middle of a season. Keen Holiday played Tyler Hudson, the private investigator who went out into Atlanta, and came back with whatever the old man needed, and he played him big and warm and funny. Tyler traded jabs with Ben Matlock like a man who was not remotely afraid of him. That chemistry was the engine of the first 3 seasons, and the show never fully replaced it. He was born in June of 1949 on Long Island and lost his father at 12. Track and football took him to the University of Maryland on a full scholarship, and a class he took almost by accident took him into theater. In 1969, he played Yank in the Eugene O'Neill play The Hairy Ape, the first black performer to take a leading role on that university's main stage. Washington came next, then the sitcom Carter Country, then voice work on the G.I. Joe cartoons, and then Matlock. Behind that, by his own later account, was a dependency on alcohol and drugs that ran about 14 years. On the 30th of December, 1988, while he was a regular on one of the most watched shows in America, highway patrol officers pulled over a car he was driving in Los Angeles just after midnight. He was booked on suspicion of misdemeanor drunk driving and released on his own recognizance. United Press International ran it the same day. In 1989, he was fired from Matlock. Sit with the timing, because it is brutal. By his own account, he was already 3 months sober when the job went away. He got clean, and then lost everything for the thing he had already stopped doing. What happened next is the part that should be better known. He spent roughly the following decade as a traveling evangelist staging gospel musicals, which is how the New York Times described it when the paper profiled him in 2007. In 2002, he became the full-time caregiver for his mother, who had Alzheimer's disease. By the time that reporter reached him, he had been sober for close to 20 years without a relapse, and he said simply that he had persevered, that there had been a lot of obstacles. The same year he took the lead in an independent film called Great World of Sound and won a Best Actor prize for it. He is 77 now, and still working. Tyler Hudson found the truth for other people every week and handed it to somebody else to use in court. Keen Holiday found his own, lost the job anyway, and kept it for the next 37 years. 3. The little man who kept turning up next door had 5 Emmy Awards on his shelf, and, by his manager's account, almost nothing in the bank to show for the years that earned them. Don Knotts played Les Calhoun, Ben Matlock's neighbor, in 17 episodes between 1988 and 1992. A small, delighted, endlessly confident nuisance who was permanently certain he was about to be helpful. Nobody watching believed for a second they were seeing a neighbor. They were watching Barney Fife back in a room with Andy Taylor, and it worked every time. His childhood was harder than the face suggests. He was the youngest of 4 sons in Morgantown, West Virginia. His father had schizophrenia and alcoholism and died of pneumonia when Don was 13. He served in the Army from 1943 to 1946 with a Special Services Battalion, entertaining troops in the Pacific, and came home to take a degree from West Virginia University. Then came the money. On The Andy Griffith Show, Knotts was on a straight performer's salary of roughly $1,250 an episode, something near $35,000 a year, with no piece of the show at all. His manager, Sherwin Bash, is quoted in Richard Kelly's book about the series saying that he worked out a terrible deal for Knotts, one where the man ended up making no money in 5 years. A later book describes Knotts going to Griffith after the 5th season to ask for a larger share, and Griffith misunderstanding what was being asked. Knotts left Mayberry, and 5 Emmy Awards are the entire return on that period of his life. He married 3 times. Catherine Metz gave him 2 children, Thomas and Karen, before that marriage ended in 1964. In 2002, he married Frances Yarborough, who was with him at the end. The end came on the 24th of February 2006 at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. He was 81, and what killed him was lung and breathing failure brought on by pneumonia linked to lung cancer. His family was in the room, and so was Andy Griffith, who stayed until around 6:30 and later said that although his friend could no longer answer him, he was able to tell him that he loved him. Karen, his daughter, has said he stayed funny right to the end, and that she had to leave the room in order to laugh. He is buried at Westwood Village Memorial Park. If one thing in this story makes you angry, tell me in the comments whether Don Knotts should have been given a piece of that show. 5 Emmy Awards and no ownership is a sentence worth arguing about. 4. Somebody on this list quit while she was ahead, and she is the busiest one of all of them today. Linda Pearl played Charlene Matlock, Ben's younger daughter and his law partner, through the whole of Season 1, taking over after a different actress played the part in the pilot movie. Charlene was written as his equal, quick and bright, and faintly impatient, a young lawyer visibly waiting for a case of her own. The waiting never ended, and that was the problem. Her childhood does not sound like anybody else's on this list. At 5, she moved with her family to Japan, trained at a Tokyo acting academy, and performed at the Imperial Theater there, playing Helen Keller in The Miracle Worker. She was an American child taking lead roles in Japanese theater. Returning at 15, she studied at Finch College and at the Lee Strasberg Institute, and turned up on Happy Days in 1974, and again on the same series 8 years later as a completely different character. So when season 1 of Matlock ended, she left. Speaking to the Los Angeles Times a few years afterwards, she said she went because the part was going nowhere for her, and because it was not what she or the producers had originally thought it would be. A newspaper piece in 1987 put it more bluntly, describing a role that amounted to being blonde and cute and nodding sweetly. Her personal life has been eventful. She married Desi Arnaz Jr. in 1979, a screenwriter in 1988, a British peer in 1993, with whom she had her only child, and a fourth husband in 2006. Since 2020, she has been with the actor Patrick Duffy. They fell for each other over video calls during the lockdowns, then played a couple on daytime television, and appeared together in a film last year. She is 70 now, acting steadily and touring as a jazz singer. Charlene Matlock existed to stand slightly behind her father and agree with him. Linda Pearl declined the arrangement after 1 season and has spent the 39 years since making her own noise. 2 entries from here comes the man whose first big film was built on a real murder in California, and he played the boy who did it. 5. The private investigator who replaced Tyler Hudson spent the last 16 years of his life being called Professor by teenagers who had no idea what he had done. Clarence Gilliard Jr. played Conrad McMasters, a former deputy sheriff and rodeo rider, from 1989 to 1993. He gave the part an unhurried watchfulness, a big man who never raised his voice because he never needed to, the calm center of a show whose lead was constantly performing confusion. He was born on Christmas Eve 1955 into an Air Force family, and grew up on bases in Hawaii, Texas, and Florida. A year as a cadet at the Air Force Academy ended when he left the service. By the time Matlock hired him, he had already appeared in 2 of the largest films of the decade. He was the radar intercept officer in Top Gun, and 2 years later he was Theo, the criminal computer expert who cracks the vault in Die Hard. The man who played Ben Matlock's investigator is, to a whole generation, one of the robbers. The next job was bigger. From 1993 to 2001, he played the Texas Ranger Jimmy Trevette beside Chuck Norris, and then he did something almost nobody in his position does. He went and got a Master of Fine Arts, and in 2006 he became an associate professor of theater at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, teaching stage and screen acting there for more than 15 years. Twice married, he had 6 children. His first marriage ended in divorce, and in 2001 he married Elena Castillo, who survived him. In late November of 2022, after a long illness that his family never named publicly, he died at his home in Las Vegas at 66. The university announced it days later, which is why most obituaries carry a later date than his own record. There was a private ceremony and a cremation, and no cemetery to visit. Conrad McMasters carried a badge before he carried a camera bag. Clarence Gilliard put both down and spent his final years handing the whole business over to teenagers in a classroom in the desert. If you are still here, subscribe. The final entry alone holds a marriage that lasted 39 years, and a Golden Globe almost nobody remembers being won. 6. The youngest man on this list had already played a killer in a film built on a real homicide before Ben Matlock ever handed him a case file. Daniel Roebuck joined in 1992 as Cliff Lewis, the last junior partner, a fresh law graduate and the son of Ben's childhood friend. He played Cliff eager, rumpled, and out of his depth, the one person in the room who also did not see the trap coming. In 1986, he was in a film called River's Edge. The screenwriter Neil Jimenez based it in part on something that happened in Milpitas, California, in November of 1981. A teenage girl named Marcy Renee Conrad was raped and strangled by a boy she knew, who then bragged about it and personally took at least 13 people out to look at her body. Nobody called the police for 2 days. That is what River's Edge was made about, and Daniel Roebuck played the killer. He grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and left the Catholic high school there in 1981. After Matlock, he became one of the most reliably employed character actors in the business. He was Deputy Marshal Bobby Biggs in The Fugitive, Dr. Arzd in 9 episodes of Lost, and a repeat collaborator with the director Rob Zombie. His private life took 3 attempts. A marriage in the 1980s ended after 4 years. The second, begun in 1994, ended in divorce in 2013. And if you have read anywhere that this wife died, that is false. In December of 2015, he married Tammy Roebuck, and in 2020 the two of them founded a non-profit that makes faith-based films. Grace and Buster are his children, and the first film he directed himself is called Getting Grace. It is about a teenage girl dying of cancer who walks into a funeral home to ask a stranger what happens to her afterwards. He named the girl after his daughter and cast his son to play him in the flashbacks. He is 63 and works constantly. Cliff Lewis spent 3 seasons learning how to get the innocent out of a courtroom. Daniel Roebuck began as the boy who helped hide a murdered girl in a story that was true, and has spent the second half of his career making films about how to die well. 7. A former Miss Florida walked into that law office and became the only person who could argue with Ben Matlock and occasionally win. Nancy Stafford played Michelle Thomas, an American attorney who had built a practice in London before coming back to partner with him, poised and cool and slightly amused. Michelle had heard the country lawyer routine before and had no intention of pretending it was charming. She held the partner's chair from 1987 to 1992. She grew up in a devout Baptist household outside Fort Lauderdale, in a family that also produced a politician. Her older brother served as a mayor and then in the Florida House of Representatives. A degree from the University of Florida came first, then the Miss Florida title in 1976, then modeling in New York and a move to Los Angeles in 1982. Her screen career started in daytime, then guest spots on Magnum, PY, and St. Elsewhere, and then 5 seasons of Matlock. Her exit was a matter of geography rather than grievance. When Andy Griffith moved the production out of California and across to Wilmington, North Carolina, so that he would no longer have to commute from his own home state, several people declined to go. She was one of them. And reporting at the time also mentioned wanting more time with her husband, a pastor named Larry Myers. She is 72 and has spent the decades since on a different stage. For 11 years, she hosted a syndicated fashion and beauty program, and she has written a shelf of books about faith, including one whose whole argument is that a woman should stop measuring herself by her reflection. Michelle Thomas was the sharpest lawyer in that office and the best-dressed person on the show. Nancy Stafford has spent the years since telling audiences that appearance is the least interesting fact about anyone. 8. Last is the prosecutor who kept losing, played by a woman who had already won a Golden Globe before most of this cast had a career. Julie Sumars played Assistant District Attorney Julie March, recurring from the beginning, a full regular from Season 3 to Season 6, and back once as a guest in the final year. She played her dry and unbothered, a lawyer who had heard the A.W. Shucks act 100 times and simply waited for him to finish. Underneath the courtroom losses, there was real warmth, and Julie March gave the series the only sustained adult relationship it ever had. She was born in April of 1940 in Fremont, Nebraska, and raised in Iowa and South Dakota with 3 brothers. Her television career started in 1960, and through that decade she turned up on Gunsmoke, Perry Mason, and The Fugitive. Then came a comedy called The Governor and J.J., which lasted barely more than a season and won her the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Television Comedy in 1970, shared that night with Carol Burnett. 20 years later, Matlock brought her a second Golden Globe nomination. Her personal life ran through 4 marriages. 3 were brief, spread across the 1960s and 70s. The 4th was not. She married John Carnes in 1984 and stayed married to him for 39 years, until he died in June of 2023 at 85, at their home in the California desert. They had 2 children. She is 86 now, long retired, and widowed for 3 years. On screen, she lost in court every week to a man in a cheap suit. Julie Sumars won the biggest prize of her life at 29 for a show almost nobody remembers and became famous instead for losing, Andy Griffith was buried on his island within 5 hours of his last breath. The show he made still runs every afternoon, arguing a case that ended 3 decades ago.